All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Return by Bentley Little. This is a horror novel written in 2002. And I am going to be reading and reviewing all the Bentley Little books that I have in my collection. Gosh, I've got a whole bunch of them over here. We'll just pan over here through my big library and down to that's the Bentley Little collection right there. Anyway, there's probably some 25, 30 books that I got. Dude's a good writer. Let's talk about The Return. Talk about the cover first, because you know I love graphic design and cover illustration. I quite like this little paperback book design. It's got the silver border with the inside little thing, a little skull stuck on a... What is that? Looks like it's stuck on a stake with a haunted mesa back there, a desert scene. And then the back, you know, it looks pretty dope. It's all right. It's good for a little paperback novel. So, what's this about? Bentley Little writes horror novels, so this is a great horror novel set in the southwestern deserts of the United States of America, Arizona particularly. So this book started out pretty interesting for me. It actually starts out with a scene told from the perspective of Zane Grey. The old Western writer Zane Grey, who wrote Riders of the Purple Sage and wrote just about 50 or 60 Western novels, and this Zane Grey was the most popular Western novelist in the world, probably right next to Louis L'Amour. But Zane Grey was an old-timer. He wrote all of his Westerns back in the early 1900s. Literally from like 1900 to like 1930 was when he was prolifically writing Westerns. And so we've got this prologue told from the perspective of this old Western writer, and he's kind of stuck in a sort of this area of Arizona where there's all these mesas sticking up out of the landscape, and it's dark and it's getting haunted. He hears things moving around in the dark. It just freaks him out, and so he skedaddles on out of there. And but while he was kind of like writing this book under the Tonto Rim. So Bentley Little talks about, in the prologue, Zane Grey writing the book under the Tonto Rim when all this stuff is happening. And I'm thinking, did this really happen to Zane Grey? Was this like something from Zane Grey's real life? And it seems to me like Bentley Little is going to tie this book, The Return, into some of the events that maybe happened in this old time Zane Grey book, and which was interesting because I have all the Zane Grey novels, and I was like, oh, I've got to now that I read this, now I'm going to read this. So we're leaving a review of this today. Tomorrow I'm actually going to leave a review of Under the Tonto Rim because it ties so closely into this horror novel. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that as the review goes on. So this is about mysterious spirits living in the deserts of the Southwest. And if you've ever been to the deserts of the Southwest, you know that there's magic just in that landscape. It just is unmistakable. There's something there. If you've ever spent the night out under the desert stars, and as the sun goes down and things are so quiet and calm, and the red rocks are just gleaming in the sunlight, and then they just start to slowly fade to purple and then darkness, and then they're just big dark monoliths blocking out the stars. You just feel something both beautiful and eerie is in the air. And Bentley Little does a great job of capturing that in this book, as does Zane Grey in his novels, and as does Louis L'Amour in a lot of his Westerns. So anyway, Glenn is one of the characters. There's a lot of characters in this book. This book probably has too many characters for the page count, but we'll forgive Bentley Little for that. But Glenn He's traveling from San Francisco to Arizona to sell some properties that his parents own down in this area where this book is taking place. Cameron is another character. He's a young Boy Scout out on a Boy Scout outing out in the Arizona desert. I can relate to this because I was once a Boy Scout, and when we would go on Boy Scout outings in southern Utah, we were just out in the desert. And this happens on these Boy Scout outings, and this happens to Cameron, is around the campfire at night, you start telling legends of ghost cowboys and ghost Indians and Spanish and lost Spanish treasure and different things that creep and crawl in the night at the desert. And you just do this as Boy Scouts around the campfire. If you've ever been a Boy Scout in the desert Southwest, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, Cameron is part of a Boy Scout troop doing all this, and they're freaking themselves out at night with their little ghost tales. And then, well, for real, in the night, for reals, bad stuff starts happening to them. I won't get into that, but clearly it's horror novel stuff starts happening to the Boy Scout troops. Glenn, when he goes out to sell the property, horror novel stuff starts to happen to him. And then, and one of the things that, one of the ghost stories that these boys tell, well, their scoutmaster tells them, he actually tells them again about Zane Grey and the haunted mesa that the Boy Scouts have camped under. The Zane Grey once camped under this mesa, and he was attacked by something that was half human and half spider and all this weird stuff, and the kids are just like, oh my gosh. And so we get not only do we get the prologue about Under the Tonto Rim in this book, but we also get the Scoutmaster later on expounding upon that prologue of Zane Grey's writing of Under the Tonto Rim. And he even says this mesa that we're camped under is the Mogollon Rim, but it used to be called the Tonto Rim. And it's part of Zane Grey's lore, and all the kids are like, oh. But then at night, weird stuff actually does start happening. There's another character, Bonnie. I'd say those are our three main characters. Glenn, who's trying to sell his parents' property, the Boy Scout Cameron, and then Bonnie, who is charge of a museum. It's actually called the Haunted Anasazi Museum, and it's got there's like an unexpected history of the ancient Anasazi and the native cultures and the supernatural phenomenon of the old Southwest Arizona and stuff like that. And so she's kind of studied all this her whole life. All of these characters sort of come together in this really good kind of horror novel set in the desert Southwest about desert Southwest things and ancient Anasazi lore, and ancient Native American, ghosts. And, it just spirals into horror novel coolness, and it's really well done, and Bentley Little did a good job with this. I think I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. I think he could have dialed back a little bit on the number of characters that are in this, but that's just a minor quibble. But very interesting, and it did spur me on to go ahead, and my next read after this was Under the Tonto Rim, because I wanted to compare and contrast and see what was happening between the two books and if there were parallels and any of that. So stay tuned for this review tomorrow. This gets an 8.5. Talk to you later.